By his final years, though, even that level of public presence had been stripped entirely. Speech was gone, the wheelchair was permanent, and his very last public appearance came on April 9, 2016, at Celebrity Fight Night in Phoenix, Arizona, a charity fundraiser for Parkinson's research, the exact disease that had been dismantling him for 3 decades, where he wore a dark bow tie, sat next to Carrie Underwood, received a standing ovation from the entire room, and was raising money for the disease that had taken his voice while still showing up in person to do it. Politics, less than 2 months after that night, Ali was hospitalized in Phoenix for respiratory complications. His condition collapsed over 5 days, family gathered at his bedside, they held his hands, kissed him, whispered prayers into his ear, and his daughter Hana Ali later shared that even as organ failure set in, Ali's heart continued beating for a full 30 minutes before it finally stopped, while the family whispered to him that it was all right, that they would be okay, that he could go, giving him permission to release the fight he had been waging against his own body for over 3 decades. Muhammad Ali died at 9:10 p.m. on June 3, 2016. Official cause septic shock from natural causes after 32 years living with Parkinson's disease. He was 74 years old, and he had designed his own procession, mapped the route, hand-picked the eulogists, made sure his hearse passed his childhood home one final time, and then said goodbye with a squeeze of the hand, completing a circle that began in a pink bungalow in Louisville's West End and ended in the same city with 100,000 people chanting his name. The story that brought all those people to those streets started with a name he refused to carry and a draft card he refused to touch. And what that cost him was something most people have never looked at directly: the systematic destruction of his career during his physical prime by a government that demanded conformity from a man who had built his entire identity around resistance. February 25, 1964, Cassius Clay knocked out Sonny Liston and became the heavyweight champion of the world at 22 years old. And the next morning, he walked into a press conference and announced his membership in the Nation of Islam, immediately creating a situation where a large portion of the country wanted its old champion back, preferably under his old name, preferably without the religious politics attached. But that champion was no longer available because he was gone for good. The Nation of Islam in 1964 was not conventional Islamic practice by any mainstream measure. It was a black separatist movement built as a direct response to the systematic oppression of black Americans in the 20th century, operating on a theological framework that categorized white people as a manufactured race, while also carrying anti-Semitic threads that had drawn sustained criticism across the political spectrum, leading Floyd Patterson to publicly compare joining the NOI to joining the Ku Klux Klan, and Joe Louis to voice his opposition, while the boxing establishment wanted no part of any of it, and Ali was not in the business of managing the boxing establishment's comfort. The man most directly responsible for setting Ali on this path was Malcolm X, the NOI's most powerful national voice, whom Ali first encountered at a Nation of Islam rally in Chicago in 1962. And Malcolm was something the young Clay had never seen in a public black figure: completely fearless, surgically articulate, and capable of delivering withering critiques of the American government's treatment of black Americans on national television, then showing up the following morning and saying it all again at full volume. For a young man who had always known his own worth but lacked political architecture to build around it, Malcolm was the missing structure, visiting Clay's training camps, present in Miami in the lead-up to the Liston fight, providing spiritual grounding in the most high-stakes days of Clay's career, and the bond ran deep and fast and changed the direction of both their lives. On March 6, 1964, Elijah Muhammad formally bestowed the name Muhammad Ali, beloved of God, while the birth name Cassius Clay traced to a Kentucky slave-holding family of the same name, and Ali discarded it without a backward glance, making the name change a public political declaration that a large portion of the mainstream press refused to honor for years, with broadcasters continuing to say Clay and sports journalists continuing to print it, leading Ali to respond by refusing to engage with anyone who used it in his presence every single time without exception. The friendship with Malcolm, however, was heading toward a fracture that neither man had planned for, as in March 1964 Malcolm broke publicly with Elijah Muhammad following revelations of personal scandals involving NOI leadership and reached out to Ali hoping he would follow, but Ali chose the organization over the friendship, publicly siding with Elijah Muhammad in what included a reportedly painful encounter in Ghana in May 1964, where Ali turned away from Malcolm in front of witnesses, and Malcolm X was assassinated in February 1965 before Ali ever had the opportunity to repair it. In his 2004 autobiography, Ali wrote that turning his back on Malcolm was one of the greatest mistakes and regrets of his life, that Malcolm had been right about so many things, and that he had been a visionary ahead of all of them, while in a 1971 British television interview, Ali articulated the NOI's position on racial integration with complete calm and zero hesitation in a way that left the interviewer audibly struggling to keep pace. He converted to Sunni Islam in 1975 when Elijah Muhammad's son assumed leadership of the NOI and moved hundreds of thousands of members into mainstream Islamic practice, and Ali followed that transition entirely and never looked back, transforming from the man who had articulated racial separatism on national television into one of the most universally embraced figures in modern history, proving that people change while the full record still exists regardless. Then came April 28, 1967. And the single most consequential decision Muhammad Ali made outside a boxing ring in his entire life, when he stood at a military induction center in Houston, Texas, and when his name was called, he did not step forward. They called it 3 separate times, and he did not move once, creating consequences that were immediate and total, as he was convicted of draft evasion, sentenced to 5 years in federal prison, and a fine of $10,000. While boxing commissions, beginning with New York, stripped him of the heavyweight title, banned him from professional competition on American soil, and revoked his passport, leaving him at 25 years old as the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world, whose career the government had just declared over because he would not put on a uniform. The national reaction was not measured, with Congressman Frank Clark calling him a public disgrace and telling reporters that Ali turned his stomach, former heavyweight champion Billy Khan publicly announcing he would never attend another Ali fight, veterans organizing memorabilia burns across the country, and the Draft Dodger label attaching itself to his name across mainstream media, where it maintained its grip for years, while American public opinion in 1966 and still broadly supported the Vietnam War, and Ali's refusal read to a large portion of the country as betrayal, wearing religion as its disguise. Ali's basis for refusal operated on 2 tracks simultaneously. As a minister in the Nation of Islam, he cited NOI doctrine that Muslims were not to participate in wars unless declared by God himself, and stated plainly he was prepared to serve prison time for that position. But running underneath the religious argument was a simpler case he made on college campuses, at press conferences, and on television throughout the entire exile period. That he was being asked to fight for the freedom of people on the other side of the planet by the same country that was actively denying those same freedoms to Black Americans living inside its borders. A contradiction in his framing that required no advanced degree to understand. He did not waver across the 3.5 years of his exile, and between the ages of 25 and 29, when most athletes are at absolute peak physical capacity, Ali toured college campuses, gave lectures, and kept the argument alive while the government kept his passport locked and the boxing commissions kept his license denied, until the Supreme Court overturned his conviction unanimously in 1971, ruling that the appeal board had failed to provide adequate written justification for denying his conscientious objector claim, a procedural reversal rather than a ruling on the underlying principle, but one that gave him back his right to fight just as the cultural temperature around Vietnam had shifted dramatically, and the Draft Dodger framing was in slow retreat across mainstream commentary. Inside the ring, Ali generated his own category of controversy entirely separate from the political battles, as his 1967 fight against Ernie Terrell, who had publicly and repeatedly refused to call him Muhammad Ali in the press buildup and continued using clay, became one of the most uncomfortable championship performances in boxing history when, rather than finishing Terrell as the opportunity clearly presented itself, Ali extended the fight across all 15 rounds, repeatedly punching Terrell and asking "What's my name?", creating a split in the boxing community over whether that was creative justice or deliberate cruelty, with the answer likely depending entirely on which side of the name debate you were standing on. Was personal life generated its own separate controversy running parallel to everything else, as Ali married 4 times and fathered 9 acknowledged children, his first marriage to Sonia Roy, ending partly because she refused to conform to NOI expectations around dress and conduct, his second wife Kalila, later describing pervasive infidelity throughout their marriage, and while still married to Kalila, Ali fathered a daughter Mia with Wanda Bolton in a relationship that included an Islamic ceremony carrying no legal standing, situations where former wives spoke publicly about these dynamics over the years, and in most cases extended forgiveness over time, while the record remains the record and sits alongside everything else in the full account of who Muhammad Ali was. The man on those Louisville streets, the man 100,000 people chanted for, carried all of this simultaneously, and understanding that is the only way to understand him honestly, while the foundation underneath all of it, the reason any of this story exists at all, was built in boxing rings against opponents who came specifically to take what he had built, creating a legacy constructed through combat that transcended sports entirely. Muhammad Ali turned professional on October 29, 1960, with a 6-round decision win over Tony Hunsaker in Louisville just weeks after returning from Rome with an Olympic light heavyweight gold medal at 18 years old, and over the following 21 years he compiled a professional record of 56 wins, 5 losses, and 37 knockouts, became the only heavyweight in history to win the lineal championship 3 separate times, produced more Fight of the Year performances than any other boxer of his era, and was named Fighter of the Year by Ring magazine on 6 separate occasions, numbers that are clean while the path to them was absolutely not. Unfiltered on February 25, 1964, Cassius Clay entered the ring in Miami against Sonny Liston as an 8-1 betting underdog, facing a man who had just finished dispatching Floyd Patterson in a single round twice, and had constructed around himself a mythology of near invincibility that the boxing establishment had largely accepted as settled fact, with the consensus being that whoever fought Liston next was absorbing a professional embarrassment as a matter of formality, and the 22-year-old challenger loudly calling Liston too ugly to hold the title was entertaining in the press build-up, but professional opinion was that the entertainment would stop almost immediately once the bell rang, except that professional opinion was spectacularly wrong. Clay built his entire approach around movement and tempo that Liston simply could not track, making him reach, miss, and reset continuously, which exhausts a fighter in ways that no punch-by-punch scorecard captures, and by the middle rounds Liston was struggling visibly, leading to the fight ending when Liston failed to answer the bell for round 7, citing a shoulder injury. While the youngest heavyweight champion in history at that point stood in the center of the ring and made absolutely certain everyone in the building understood what they had just witnessed. The rematch on May 25, 1965 in Lewiston, Maine ended inside the first round on a knockdown that was designated the Phantom Punch almost immediately, as the strike was so fast that a significant portion of ringside journalists missed it on first viewing. And debate about whether Liston went down legitimately has continued for 6 decades, with Ali maintaining until his death that the punch was exactly what it appeared to be, while slow-motion analysis has never definitively resolved it either way. Though what it did resolve was Ali's status as heavyweight champion of the world, and the combination of both Liston wins provided the platform for everything that followed. Joe Frazier was the one opponent in Muhammad Ali's entire career who could not be dismissed with theatrics because Frazier simply refused to be dismissed, leading to a psychological campaign Ali ran against him before and between their 3 fights that was relentless and personal in ways that went well past boxing promotion, as Ali called him a gorilla, called him Uncle Tom, publicly questioned his identity, and suggested Frazier was a tool of the establishment, an extraordinary charge from a man who had sacrificed his prime years protesting that same establishment, attacks that Frazier carried as genuine wounds rather than competitive noise, while Frazier's response was always consistent in that he would deal with all of it inside the ring and not 1 second before. Fight 1 on March 8, 1971 at Madison Square Garden was billed as the fight of the century. The first professional fight in which both men entered undefeated with legitimate claims to the heavyweight title, an event Frank Sinatra photographed at ringside for Life magazine, and 15 rounds later, Frazier had the unanimous decision and had dropped Ali with a left hook in the final frame, marking the first time Ali had ever been both knocked down and beaten as a professional, though he climbed back to his feet immediately while the scorecards were not negotiable. In the years between fights, Ali and Frazier appeared together on the Dick Cavett Show in a sit-down interview that exposed exactly how much genuine animosity existed underneath the performance of competition, tensions that carried into Fight 2 where Ali took the unanimous decision in January 1974 across 12 rounds that were competitive throughout but represented the least dramatic chapter of their 3-part story, with its main function being setting up what came next. The Thrilla in Manila on October 4, 1975, in the Philippines, is the fight that boxing historians return to whenever the conversation turns to human physical capacity at its absolute limit, as both men were emptied completely across 14 rounds of combat in brutal heat, with the quality of punishment exchanged in the later rounds extraordinary even by the standards of everything they had already survived across 2 previous wars. Until Frazier's trainer Eddie Futch stopped the fight before round 15, declining to send his fighter out for one more round, a decision Frazier never entirely forgave him for, while Ali said afterward it was the closest he had ever come to dying inside a ring, and he was not speaking figuratively, as neither man was entirely the same after Manila and the physical cost on both sides was permanent and irreversible. George Foreman on October 30, 1974, in Kinshasa, Zaire, presented a different challenge entirely, as Ali was 32, Foreman was 25 and unbeaten, having recently taken Frazier and Ken Norton apart in a combined total of fewer than 4 rounds, leading Foreman to enter as a heavy favorite while the boxing establishment viewed Ali as a man whose best years were demonstrably behind him, diminished by the exile, the Frazier loss, and the accumulated distance of a career that had already run longer than most. But what nobody outside Ali's corner knew was the specific tactical plan he had constructed for this exact opponent, which he had kept entirely private in the weeks leading up to the fight. He called it the rope-a-dope, and the principle was deliberately counterintuitive. Lean against the ropes, cover the vital points, absorb Foreman's power output at minimized cost to the head, force him to throw at maximum effort against a defensive posture that would not break, wait for his power reserves to run out, and then attack, a strategy that while watching it unfold in real time with Foreman landing shots in the early rounds that would have finished most opponents, looked to nearly everyone watching like something had gone catastrophically wrong with Ali's preparation, until by the 8th round Foreman was working on exhausted legs and diminished power. Ali came off the ropes, landed a combination, and Foreman went down. Ken Norton represents the Ali rivalry that receives the least attention and deserves considerably more, as Norton entered their first meeting in March 1973 as a significant underdog and walked out having taken a split decision and having broken Ali's jaw in the process, forcing Ali to finish the back half of that fight with a fractured jaw while declining to stop and not allowing the arena to see it on his face, before Ali won the rematch by split decision in August 1973. And their third fight in September 1976 went to Ali on a narrow decision that Norton and a large portion of the boxing press believed had gone the wrong direction, creating a trilogy that showcased Ali's ability to adapt and survive even when facing opponents specifically designed to exploit his weaknesses. The man who emerged from all these battles, who designed his own funeral route through Louisville, who spent 3 decades fighting Parkinson's disease with the same determination he brought to every opponent, represents something that transcends athletic achievement entirely. As Muhammad Ali did not simply fight, he performed, he argued, he converted, he protested, he survived a government that tried to dismantle him, and then he came back and proved his point in every arena where it could be proven, leaving behind a legacy that continues to generate viral footage and renewed appreciation decades after his death, because the principles he fought for remain as relevant today as they were when he first refused to step forward at that induction center in Houston, creating a story that connects a pink bungalow in Louisville's West End to a global funeral procession that drew 100,000 people who understood exactly why they needed to be there, chanting his name one final time.